Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. And today is a special, special show. Today is something that is really powerful and something that is meaningful to everyone. It's about the climate. That's the reason why I placed the planet behind me. We're all concerned about the climate. I have a wonderful guest. I'd like to introduce everyone to Tomer Tamarakan. Now, Tomer, thank you so much for joining us and for taking your time to speak with me today, and especially about the cause and the case and the concern about climate change. I want to say, first of all, you have a beautiful office.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you. And yes, I'm a prolific reader with several thousand books here in my office, mostly classical literature, philosophy, history, and an awful lot of science. And I have a very strong interest in classical music and opera, as you can probably figure out.
Mhm. And how many books again you have?
Well over 3,000.
3,000. Wow. Well, you're getting close to Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion had 24,000 books.
Well, I toured Ben Gurion's home in Tel Aviv actually 2 times.
Yeah.
And yes, very impressive.
Yeah. That's why he was such a great and amazing leader. Question. My understanding is that you have, or you are a physics major, and you've done very, very pioneering work, amazing work in the field of energy conservation. And also, you've been awarded seven patents around the world. Is that true?
Well, yes, in 1971, I received the nation's highest honor for high school students in the field of physics for my work in nuclear magnetic resonance. And I did my undergraduate studies in physics with a dual major, or actually dual minor, in math and chemistry at NAU in the 1971 to 75 timeframe. And I've been in the energy generation and utility business since 1985. And I've developed energy instrumentation and measurement devices and have been granted 7 patents in the United States, Israel, Europe, and China for those devices. And in the US alone, my patents are practiced by the nation's largest utility companies on over 90 million devices.
Wow, 90 million. That's very impressive. I also, first of all, that you were a high school, so to speak, science genius, I'll call you. And the reason why to me it's so impressive because I went to Bronx High School of Science, and so I understand very well the notion of high school science and competition and so forth. And I I really admire people who have a great deal of love for science and passion for science. I still have it.
Well, thanks for saying that. The project that I did, as I said, was really pioneering work at the time in nuclear magnetic resonance. And
That's
because of
tremendous.
that project, that kind of gave me a great deal insight in terms of molecular structures and resonance and how electrons move around, et cetera, which is very, very germane to the subject of climate change and greenhouse gases.
Excellent. So that leads me to my next question. Where did the notion of climate change come from and why?
Well, yes, everybody seems to be talking about it. Even CBS 60 Minutes featured Bill Gates speaking on the subject a couple of weeks ago. Over the last couple of decades, anthropogenic global warming, which we now simply call climate change, has become enormously exaggerated to scare people into allowing their governments to take actions that are very costly and otherwise not needed. As an example, our newly elected leader in the United States, President Biden, says that he's making climate change his central agenda as a matter of national security, and that he intends to spend trillions of taxpayer dollars to combat it. Carbon taxes, of course, have taken hold worldwide, strangling people with exorbitantly high fuel and energy costs.
Gosh, okay, it's very interesting. But is there another reason? Because I tell you, what bothered me was I read something in your climate website about population reduction or something. Was that?
Well, in fact, climate change was first adopted by the Club of Rome. David Rockefeller was one of the members in its 1968 inauguratory meeting in their efforts to promote population reduction. And it was based at the time on an inaccurate understanding of the 19th century works of John Tyndall and the savant Arrhenius. And it was really cemented in a seminar organized by the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead, along with Paul Ehrlich, who had just released his book, The Population Bomb, and John Holdren, who we'll talk about Mr. Holdren in a few minutes. And the name of their seminar was called The Atmosphere, Endangered and Endangering.
Wow. That to me is quite startling. That's one of the reasons why I invited you to the show, because I want you to speak about this subject.
Well, their goal, and I think it's important to note that the goal of both of those events, Club of Rome and the Mead conference or seminar, was really to restrict energy under the guidance of what they thought would become a future one world government. Hence the emphasis we see today on what we call the Great Reset and their objective of establishing common banking systems and monetary units as an example.
It's very, let me say this way. The reason I'm stuttering about this is because I am shocked, really am, because my mouth is agape to the whole concept, the fact that there is and there was and is still going on this worldwide, so to speak, government. And it's not conspiracy. I mean, I've seen things on the websites, I've seen things on YouTube, I've read different types of articles, mentioned by the people themselves who are involved in the Great Reset. And the Great Reset is something that we have to really be wary of. My question is, in terms of why has carbon dioxide been targeted as the primary cause of climate change? Where did that come from?
Well, actually, because of the early works of Arrhenius, Fourier, Elholm, and Tyndall, scientists had a very basic misunderstanding or an incorrect idea that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases like water vapor acted like giant panes of glass in the sky, trapping heat on the ground, much as a greenhouse does here on Earth. Originally, Arrhenius calculated that carbon dioxide absorbs and emits much more infrared radiation or heat than water vapor. However, Arrhenius and the others ultimately realized that the absorbance spectra, meaning the wavelengths of the incoming radiation of water vapor and carbon dioxide, overlap. Since the atmosphere contains over 20 times more water vapor than carbon dioxide, water vapor was actually absorbing much more infrared than carbon dioxide was. Arrhenius realized this, as did Tyndall, and both stated that water vapor is the most important of the polyatomic greenhouse gases, and that carbon dioxide was a very minor, almost bit player. Arrhenius reversed his hot Earth position in a little known 1906 paper, which was written in German, which is why it's little known today, and because he became concerned with cold cycles and a potential new ice age. He stated that the relatively minor warming due to carbon dioxide could offset the effect of such a cooling cycle and help keep plant growth here on Earth green. So once again, I have to state that water vapor is by far the most plentiful greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. And we all know that. Arrhenius was an electrochemist who based his understanding really on the best science of the time, the late 18th century, based on scientific luminaries of that time, including my great-grandfather, Thomas E. Thorpe, who was knighted in the UK after writing 20-some books on physical chemistry. And he also was the chief chemist to the British government and director of government laboratories in the UK. Later, Max Planck, we've all heard of Max Planck, developed our modern understanding of quantum mechanics, and Carl Schwarzschild focused on greenhouse gases. Together, they showed us the way that greenhouse gases behave. And these gas molecules, they do in fact absorb infrared energy, but they dissipate it very, very quickly. In fact, they dissipate it in about 1 million billionth of a second, which we call a femtosecond, which is 10 to the minus 15 seconds. So again, that's a very, very short period of time that energy is gone. This radiated energy follows what we call the inverse square law, which means that the energy level is reduced by a factor of 4 every time the distance doubles. And that brings us to a very important point, which is the fundamental law of mass and energy, which really prohibits the Earth from warming due to energy supplied from the sun prior to the greenhouse gas re-emission of that infrared radiation. So this concept alone, conservation of mass and energy, absolutely kills the global warming theory. Engineers think of this as the first and the second laws of thermodynamics. And this entire mechanism can have the effect of delaying cooling, but it simply cannot increase warming. You cannot get more energy out of a system than you originally put into it. So, as I said, think about that for a few seconds. But anyway, carbon dioxide is a man-made forcer of warming. It's even more unlikely because increases in carbon dioxide levels always follow warming. They do not precede. Why? Because over 50 to 60 times more carbon dioxide gas is held in the oceans and other water bodies here on Earth. And this follows what we know as Henry's gas law, which is defined by temperature partitions, by actually a temperature coefficient and a partition, meaning the amount of the gas above the body versus the amount of gas that has been in solution within the body. So greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, as I said, they serve to delay cooling on the Earth, but they certainly do not create warming. And even Tyndall wrote about this in his 1875 book, comparing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to a blanket as you sleep at night. So these gases serve as the Earth's blanket. That's not a perfect analogy, but it's a very good analogy. And it's one that leading scientists such as Dr. Will Happer constantly use in their presentations. Most telling of all, however, and this is something that I kind of stumbled on about 2 or 3 years ago, is the fact that our daily monitoring of carbon dioxide levels at the Mauna Kea Keeling site in Hawaii, which just happens to be on top of a very active volcanic region. In fact, we saw the eruption just a month ago, shows that CO2 levels are actually higher today than last year. Every year they're higher than the previous year. We're now up to about 414 parts per million CO2. However, very importantly, we actually have used 30% less fuel worldwide across industrial, commercial, and transportation sectors because of the pandemic. When the pandemic started, we stopped flying, we stopped building things in factories, and commercial buildings closed down. So this kind of brings up the question, what the heck are these climate alarmists thinking anyway? What this really says is that man is not a material contributor of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, rather nature is.
These are very powerful statements you're saying. So the earth behind me, basically, the majority of all the gases that's making a greenhouse effect is really water vapor and not carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide has been maligned. Has anyone been able to prove that climate change is real?
Well, in terms of your previous statement, no, you're absolutely correct. If we look at greenhouse gases, about 95% of the quote greenhouse gases are really composed of carbon dioxide. And contrary to some misstatements that are going around the internet, water vapor is actually present at the greatest heights up to the tropopause, the greatest heights of our atmosphere in what we call the troposphere. And even though it does certainly freeze at say the 4 to 5 kilometers in elevation, the absorption characteristics of carbon dioxide actually increase as it is lower in temperature, all the way down to minus 0 degrees Kelvin, minus 273 degrees Fahrenheit. But in any event, in answer to your question, we have to keep in mind the fact that the Earth is well over 4.5 billion years old, probably close to 4.6 billion years old. The Grand Canyon gives us a great snapshot, if you will, of about 10% of that record. So if you think about this, modern man is trying to use a 50, perhaps 100-year time frame to show that man-made climate change in fact exists. However, These periods, 50 to 100 years, are somewhere in the area of 0.0000001% of the entire age of the Earth. So how we can base the probability of a trend on such a crazy short period of time, it's just mind-blowing, boggles the mind to think about. Anyway, geological samples show us that the Earth has been much warmer and much colder in the past. And that, as Dr. Happer says, we're currently in what we call a CO2 drought compared to millions of years ago, when life was very, very abundant. And we had upwards of, say, 3,000 parts per million CO2. So we can definitely prove that climate change does occur, but it occurs due to natural variations in our solar and planetary movements, coupled with the fact that the Earth sits at about a 24-degree tilt on its axis, which results in precession. And these precessions, coupled with the gravitational pulls that I mentioned a minute ago, and variations in solar activity, etc., all create what we call weather disturbances. And these weather disturbances are periodic in nature. And other events, such as volcanic eruptions, meteor strikes, atmospheric and oceanic oscillations, such as El Nino and La Nina, El Nino and also, let's cut this. Other natural events, such as volcanic eruptions, meteor strikes, atmospheric and ocean oscillations, such as El Nino and La Nina, also create further changes in the weather, but we really need to distinguish between the weather and climate. All climate predictions result from computer models based on unproven theories of man, and so far, all of these predictions have been totally wrong. Even NASA's explanation of the science of climate change on their website is scientifically and technically incorrect. And some of their employees and university associates have actually misrepresented how the scientific method works. Science does not work by consensus, far from it. Science is based on the ability to falsify a theory. So notably, as an example, the hockey stick curve developed by the famous Professor Michael Mann, in fact, is bogus. And two Canadian academics, McIntyre and McKittrick, proved that Mann's calculations, well, they literally came out of false air. They were fraudulent based on the misuse of statistics. And this was exposed in an article in none other than the MIT Technology Review in 2004. And as a result, the IPCC basically dropped Michael Mann, and they no longer reference his unfortunately famous hockey stick curve. And as I said, they distance themselves from Dr. Mann. And as a corollary, in a major well-followed lawsuit between Dr. Mann and Dr. Tim Ball, who is a leading climate scientist, Dr. Mann refused to comply with the court order to provide his mathematical proofs or data. The judge, after several years of delay, finally ordered the case to be dismissed to Dr. Ball's favor because Mann simply would never release his data, his proofs. Why? Well, because they were obviously bogus.
That's stunning. Have you any other scientists that side with you, believe in your writings, and also support you?
Well,
personally, maybe, but those who have the same common beliefs as you have.
Well, I think what you are alluding to is, are there other qualified academically and experientially or experience-wise? I think what you're asking is, are there other PhDs who repudiate this concept of man-produced global warming?
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps we want to cut and let me restate this.
Okay.
So I think, reading between the lines, what you're asking me is, are there other qualified scientists by virtue of their experience in their academics, PhDs, etc., that actually state or repudiate the concept of anthropogenic or man-made global warming. But before I go into that, let me first say the word hoax is commonly used, even by politicians. Hoax is really not a good word to use because a hoax is something which is really a jest or a joke. The fraud and deception of climate change is absolutely no joke. And the common refrain that 97% of scientists say man-made climate change is based on CO2 is a true statement. Well, in fact, that's a lie resulting from a very poorly written paper by Jonathan Cook in 2013, if I recall. And in that article, only 0.5%, 0.5% of the over 3,000 papers that were referenced cited specifically the concept of man-made warming. But the paper was so poorly written that people concluded that they meant 97% of, quote, all scientists support that theory, which is categorically untrue. In fact, a much smaller number than 97% of scientists believe that climate change is man-made. Other scientists agree that climate change may be slightly affected by man, but the effects of human-produced carbon dioxide are so small that we really don't need to worry about it. And this really is related to their effects in what we call urban heat zones. And yet other scientists say unequivocally that human-produced carbon dioxide has no measurable effect whatsoever on our temperature and storm cycles. And our work and what we are doing really is in concert with that last view. In our opinion, carbon dioxide is really 100% innocent of all the negative charges. And on our website, we have hundreds of papers, scientific papers, articles, and video lectures by leading PhD scientists explaining these details.
Earlier, you said that population reduction was the early goal for climate alarmism. Is that still true?
Well, if you ask Bill Gates, he certainly thinks so. But if you really look at the Agenda 30 publication, a report from the United Nations, they no longer have population reduction as a stated goal. They do, however, have an energy goal, and their energy goal is to assure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. So having said that, a recent February 2021 UN report on sustainability actually does suggest the need for population reduction. And many scientists express concerns about the ability of sustainability of crop growth. I should say many scientists, so let's cut. Having said that, a recent February 2021 UN report on sustainability is suggestive of the need of population reduction. And many scientists express concerns about the sustainability of crop growth to feed 7 billion people here on Earth, as well as livestock to feed them. And I think really that is the root of Bill Gates's recent comments. Eugenics, however, is still really, Scott. Eugenics is still discussed at the world leadership levels. And one of the Margaret Mead Conference members I mentioned earlier, Dr. John Holdren, has written extensively about the need for eugenics. And he, in fact, served as chief science advisor to President Obama. And I think on page 277, if I recall, in the book that he published during that time frame, he has several paragraphs devoted to the need for eugenics. However, and happily, the continued and increasing use of fossil fuels produces more CO2, which is the gas of life. All life on Earth is carbon-based, and it benefits from increases in CO2. The more CO2, the greener our Earth becomes with more plants. And even Greta Thunberg in Sweden, her great-grandfather, Savant Arrhenius, we talked about him a few minutes ago, he finally figured out this before he died. Arrhenius concluded that, yes, we need more plants, and CO2 was the absolute fundamental ingredient to plant growth.
Interesting. You've taken upon yourself to basically battle, an impossible battle almost, against a massively funded worldwide fraudulent and deceptive scheme, as you mentioned. Why have you done this?
Well, yes. Well, my father was a PhD and a doctor of education as well in physics. And he actually taught me at a very early age that when you see a problem, you really need to work to fix it. You don't complain about it, you just fix it. Having said that, my observation has been that there are many, many very well qualified PhD level scientists, Will Happer, Willie Soon, John Christie, Roy Spencer, Tim Ball, Richard Lindzen, to name a few, just off the top of my head. And they've been refuting this man-made warming and climate change theory for many years, at least 15 years, approaching 20. And of course, my personal friend, who happens to be the very funny Lord Christopher Monton in the UK, who has actually been known to jump out of airplanes into enemy camp lines, if you will, to talk about this climate change hoax. He actually began this dissenting movement over 2 decades ago. But the problem is, in my opinion, of course, is that most of these scientists, they live in their own world and they live and operate really based on their own specific areas of science. Some focus on physics, some focus on chemistry, some focus on geology, some focus on meteorology, but nobody's really put all the pieces of this puzzle together. And they don't necessarily fully appreciate the massive societal and financial impacts that the global warming fraud has on the entire world. Yeah, that's a powerful statement. And in fact, most scientists would, they never use the word fraud. And they'll probably criticize me for using that word, but I say it is indeed fraud. My personal mission is to do whatever I can to change this and help get the word out to people.
And what are you doing to do that? What's your activities and goals or methods and projects?
Okay, well, I've written a lot of articles and even chapters in books on climate change and the mistaken notion of climate change and what I call its 30 stepchild, which is green energy, AKA the Green New Deal in the United States. And I published many of these articles in Shale magazine, most recently a feature article in Shale, explaining just where does energy on our planet come from. And no, material sources of energy don't come from solar cells and windmills. They come from fossil fuels and nuclear. Anyway, our group has also completed a children's book on climate change, Don't Be Scared of Global Warming. And this book has been endorsed by lots of parents and even Pat Boone of Hollywood. In fact, Pat Boone has done a video for us on his experience with the book, which is on our website. And most importantly of all, we've written a story for a full-length, action-packed thriller movie, believe it or not, a thriller movie, which will actually teach people the truth about the fraud, the deception, all the skullduggery, and certainly the non-science, which is known as man-made climate change, and how it will literally bankrupt countries and destroy their futures for generations to come. And the name of our movie is Mango, like the fruit, Mango the movie. And it'll feature all of the leading PhDs to explain the real science, but in very simple to understand terms, recognizing that most people today have had a very poor education in science, unfortunately, in grade school and high school. And our movie will be constructed such that it's really bulletproof in terms of science, the real science. And the plot and the through line of our movie is posted on our website. And we're currently in the process of preparing the treatment now for Hollywood. And of course, we're looking for the all-important financial backers. And I should probably conclude by saying that this interview, because it's so highly technical, will be accompanied by an animated. Okay, cut. Let me conclude by saying that this interview, given the fact that it's highly scientific and technical, is being accompanied on our website with an annotated transcript. And this annotated transcript will actually link those interested viewers to a tremendous amount of references and articles, which will explain more in depth each of the very scientific concepts that you and I talked about here a couple of minutes ago.
Beautiful. I look forward to seeing the movie. Thank you so much for your time. And I recommend everyone should come and visit your website, climatesite.com, and and I'll put the name of Climate Site on the titles, and I wish everybody to come visit it. And we look forward to seeing Mango the movie, and we wish you the best of luck in your quest to save the world.
Well, thank you so much. And once again, yes, the URL of the website is Climate Site, spelled CLIMATE, and then CITE, like citation. So it's climatesite.com.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. It's been great to be with you.
You too. Bye-bye.